He had his feet planted in two different dimensions. The first was as a political ambassador rooted in political reality and conversant with some of the great figures of the 20th century. But the second was in an astral dreamland from where he configured that fate of the ancient white race that once lived at the North Pole and served as the idealistic motivational basis of Adolf Hitler so many centuries later. It is appropriate that Serrano was built in this curious way, as all poets, heroes, and philosophers tend to be, for the history of humankind is as much about spirit as it is about treasures, and the philosophy he articulated precisely defines the spiritual reality that the dark forces today are trying so hard to erase. Serrano's 900-page masterpiece titled Adolf Hitler, the Ultimate Avatar, is in one book the Iliad and the Odyssey of our time, a chronicle of civilization whose fate hangs ominously in the balance and seems about to fall victim to the horror of greed and cruelty. We have with us today an ardent seeker of the magical realm of Hyperborea, that barely known legendary civilization that began many eons ago, which spawned a philosophy of nobility that was later to be eradicated by the triumphant warriors of Yahweh, whom the Hyperboreans call the Prince of Darkness. The central issue of this Hyperborean history involves the dusty biblical legend when the sons of God mated with the daughters of men. Though the issue has been decided, the debate lingers on, and context leads directly to Hyperborea, and a little further down the line, to a single-minded fellow named Adolf Hitler, whose disciples today insist he was the most important human who ever lived. The way Serrano wrote it was this: why is Adolf Hitler the avatar? National Socialism, as created and introduced by Adolf Hitler, is considered by me to be the only system in all of the history of the world that came to give the non-Jewish people the solutions against the Jewish systems of economic liberalism and Marxism. Adolf Hitler changed everything. He put an end to usury and the gold standard, replacing it with a system whereby the workers and their labor were the most important. The most genial idea was the destruction of usury, because it is interest which allows the Jews to live without working, always the middleman between the producer and the consumer. It was such a terrible blow to the liberal Jewish system and Jewish Marxism that a world war was necessary in order to destroy Hitler. Interest on capital is sacred for these two reasons. My own interest in this subject emanates from two directions: the collective presence of Jewish influence in the powers that obliterated Hitler's Germany, that is, Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union, and the correspondence with the ancient myth-making propaganda that formed the foundations of the major Western religions of our civilization: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. These forces have combined to eliminate individual spirit from the world, making it dependent on obedience to enforced mandates rather than the spontaneous creativity of human joy that has always made life worth living. So now I want to introduce you to Loki, who I had a wonderful conversation with the other day, and he clued me into a story that I wrote the other day. I hadn't really thought about it, but all of a sudden, as I was going down the catacombs of Serrano's 900-page book, it was like a cold chill suddenly came over me, like the entrance of a ghost into the room when I read this paragraph that the Jewish Messiah is actually artificial intelligence, just as Serrano predicted, a species of monstrous golem without blood, an arithmetic entity, imaginary, cybernetic, trans-infinite. Perhaps he could have an electronic brain, a robot, which they manipulate. And what we see now in the world today is a software program called Aladdin, run by Larry Fink of BlackRock, that every country, every business in the world, every big business in the world is using to loot every country in the world and and corralling everyone into poverty, where Klaus Schwab's monstrous dictum that we're going to own nothing and be happy about it is just about to come true. So Loki, I want to welcome you to Kaminski Goes Ballistic, and Patriot Pat, I'm so glad you're here. And why do you think Serrano was so important, and why have you really devoted your life to publicizing what he had to say?
Well, if you're referring to myself, it's good to be on your show. I can't say that I've devoted my life to specifically that, but it's definitely entailed in a lot of what I'm concerned with in terms of disseminating the message of the global hidden hand and who controls it, why they control it, what their agenda is specifically, and what we can do about it, and how, and what sources philosophically or esoterically, such as Miguel Serrano or Julius Evola and people of these nature, who are high-level initiates and very involved in the opposition to the hidden hand and its agenda. That's basically what I've been attempting to do for quite a long time. I would say even without really understanding how, even as early as maybe mid-2000s or something like that, but I never really understood how to get the message out until maybe 2016 or so, when I came across the ideas of a lot of, various propaganda techniques and so forth, which for some reason I had never really given much thought to prior to that point. But I think that Serrano, more or less, is the closest that can be gotten to understanding the truth about the world situation, where we're headed, and that from the most eternal point of view, from the highest perspective we can reach spiritually, looking upon the world, because that's really the only way you can understand it, is through, if you want to call it, beyond the causal realms within this phenomenal plane of existence. It can only be understood as the phrase subspecie eternitatis, from an eternal point of view, not from this more purely materialistic worldview of left wing versus right wing, or just a bunch of people wanting to get some power for themselves or whatever. You really can't understand the global conspiracy in its millennial form without understanding that it goes beyond mere material existence and temporal power. It's about occult power.
Yes. That's why I think he's really the dualistic person that he is. He's trapped in spirit, and yet he's a world-wise politician who knew famous people all over the world. He's the perfect person to write in two dimensions at the same time, because the actual thrust of what the philosophy that Hitler espoused and what is the essence of what Serrano is trying to describe is that the spirit that is being erased by this totally empirical, spiritless takeover of the world that has been, I mean, we're on the verge of being destroyed by it right now, and spirit has just about been erased from the public dialogue.
Yeah, basically that is more or less the tendency of the demiurge, as Serrano refers to what is called Jehovah, the god of this group, who I am not able to speak about apparently. I don't really know. But this group of people, of beings, who he also refers to as, basically robots of this demiurge, or cybernetic robots, cybernetic biology, who's controlled through telepathic means, presumably by entities that exist beyond this earth plane. Basically, they're subservient to this being, the Logos, or the Demiurge, which is pretty much equivalent to the Big Bang, so far as I can properly understand it. I can't claim to be an expert, but just like everybody else, I'm looking through a glass darkly with Serrano's work, or with, like a lot of people, because I'm not an initiate. I don't have any really great, profound wisdom or understanding beyond a very limited limited extent. So basically, the claim is that these beings are related to entities from outside of this material plane, and that they are basically used as instruments on this earth to create chaos, and then more or less materialize the world to the lowest density so that they can trap people's souls in this sort of matrix world and basically vampirize their energetic, their life force.
That's happening. That's
They're
happening now.
they're basically energy vampires. In order for them to live, they have to live off others in a vampiric way, and so they have things like, historically and probably without any interruption, they have the ritual murder sacrifice. They have sacrifices in the form of creating revolution and chaos, putting people into stress and hardship. And this generates the release of energy when people are in a state of stress and, lower vibrational frequency, fear, pain, misery, deprivation, starving people to death in like the holodomers, or putting people under conditions of extreme taxation and wage slavery, like Thomas Malthus's subsistence wage, forcing children to work as factory labor in England or in America, like in the case of Leo Frank and his pencil factory, or spoken of in Charles Dickens' works. Things like that. That's basically their modus operandi, is total plantation slavery, like you see in South America, and which Serrano also speaks about, especially in the work, or in some of the shorter works, some of the later works that he had written, and Menu for the Man to Come, which is the fourth of the four-part esoteric Hitlerist quaternary, the first of which is The Golden Cord, Esoteric Hitlerism, 1972. The second is Adolf Hitler, Ultimate Avatar, 1982. Actually, it was 1978, which was The Golden Cord. Then Adolf Hitler, Ultimate Avatar, 1982. Then you have Resurrection of a Hero, 1986. And then 1991 was Menu for the Man to Come. That quaternary basically spells out in copious detail, more or less, who's doing what they're doing, what their modus operandi is, and what you can do about it spiritually and physically, because this differs from Gnosticism insofar as it's not about trying to fly away from the world, or transform yourself into this androgynous figure who's just like this balanced consciousness that's become some type of Luciferian type figure who just wants to ascend away from this material dimension. No, the intention is basically the exact opposite, which is, just to quote Serrano from one of a letter he had written to someone who was trying to distort his works in South America. It gives a good understanding of the motive or purpose of Serrano's work. For esoteric Hitlerism, for me, there is only a corruption on the surface. He's referring to a corruption of the earth plane, the material densification of the phenomenal world, of the world we live in.
Yeah.
A bad copy clothed over with a film of Maya, which is the Hindu term for illusion.
Yeah.
Hitler and the SS believed in the possibility of reversing entropy. In an instant of the Yuga of heroes, it is possible to rebuild Thula, to return to the golden age of first Hyperborea. So what does that mean? That means basically the first Earth, a higher vibrational frequency state, a spiritualization of the Earth, and it's more or less liberation from this slave matrix, which is a superimposition of the demiurge, which is, again, the Big Bang, or whatever you want to call it,
there's such a stark difference from the objectives of existing religions, where they are basically turning everyone into slaves to take orders, whereas in the level of commitment that Serrano speaks of, it's to develop humans into a much more realized species, especially when it comes to the relationships between men and women, and each gender understanding the other one better. But one of the things I got out of Ultimate Avatar is that this whole line of thought really stems from the pollution of the blood that occurred in very ancient times, that it relates to the biblical tale of the sons of God came down and mated with the daughters of men, and what that triggered, according to some parts of Ultimate Avatar, was the catastrophes that afflicted the Earth, the geophysical catastrophes that destroyed Hyperborea itself.
Right, and that was in Atlantis and so forth, when people became corrupted. These involuted devias who, according to Serrano, came to the Earth to free all the anthropoids and the whole Earth and all the sentient life on it. They deliberately chose to involute because they were dwelling in a whole different dimension, and they came to this material plane deliberately to do that, sacrificing themselves, not entirely, but taking the risk that they would not be able to ascend, or rather liberate themselves from this system of entropy that the demiurge has created, which is again a superimposition on basically eternity. This temporalizing temporality, the cycles of time, which are called the yugas in the Hindu. Now we're in the Kali Yuga, in the last, or nearly the last. You know, he speaks, Serrano, of the age of lead.
Yes.
Even more density, even more robotized, and that ties in with their whole transhumanist agenda, which is obviously what these robots of the demiurge, or the minions, those who portray themselves as this humble group of master race superiors who think they're entitled to have dominion over the whole world for themselves. They want that. They want us to be robotized. But the devias, which are again spoken of in, I think it's like the Bhagavad Gita and various works of that sort throughout the whole of the world, they involuted, they interbred with the anthropoids so they could free them from the cycles of time, which is the eternal return, which is related to the demiurge, which is basically this sort of system of entropy that's like gradually becoming more and more materially dense and lower vibrational frequencies, so that it basically traps your soul into this matrix, and then they can continue to leech off the energy vampirically to feed themselves. And like you were saying with the religion, the religious mind control systems are basically demiurgic, in the sense that they're always, worshiping oneness or worshiping the one. You just have to follow this dogma, literalist dogma of following rules that the priest caste will dictate to people, and the priest caste are all sort of the black magicians who are all interrelated with this primary group.
It's the difference between reincarnation and resurrection that leads to an understanding of a physical level that doesn't, I don't really know how to say this, that doesn't really exist, that you start to think about when you consider the image of Hyperborea, which was supposedly the original human civilization in the North Pole, when conditions were very different. And yet the disasters that were created by the fait accompli of mating with the daughters of men made that disappear into another dimension. And this is where Serrano becomes very hard for typically empirically trained people to follow, because we wind up going into dimensions that we're not really familiar with, and yet, when we think about or dream about who humans might want to be, this dimension is something that never should have been neglected, and yet it is dimension because for the demiurge wanting to control us as slaves, they don't want us disappearing into that dimension where so many of the people Serrano writes about apparently have disappeared into, if I can say that.
Yeah, it seems like basically they're the dilemma of this group, the hidden hand, whatever you wish to call it, which is not confined exclusively to Masonry, but is controlled by organizations like B'nai B'rith
Right.
At the higher levels.
Yeah.
This group, basically, their dilemma is that they want to use the Aryans, who are the source of the life force, the creators, the inventors, those who are more or less materialized gods who have lost their first estate, who are in a fallen state, fallen into matter, into the material plane, into lower vibration, through the mixture with the anthropoids, through having the blood of varying degrees of these beings in them, through that viviparous hybridization. They want to use us as an energy source, but they at the same time hate us and wish to destroy us because they understand that we're obviously derived, they understand our origin, and by virtue of their desiring to vampirize us in that way, that leads to pretty much at the sort of like the bottom of the cycles of time, like a terminal point where they cannot sustain themselves if they do not have a sufficient life force coming from an external source. But by using that external source in the way in which they're using it, they basically just bring about their own destruction, because it's only like a finite thing, at least within this dimension of being. So the mission for the Aryan basically is to pretty much destroy Jehovah, which I'm not entirely sure that Serrano seems to differentiate from the demiurge. I think it's more like a thought form than it is anything, like an egregore that's bound up to the collective consciousness of this group. And that, according to him, if they have a greater share of Aryan genes, then that will help them to lose their consciousness of this. They will not be able to escape the control of that egregore.
But it's just a disguise, because just from the motivation of their original intent, there's no way that they can reach that level of pursuit of a dream, because they are not really the dreamers, they're the exploiters, which is why since the dawn of time they've been parasites on one civilization after another. And as you were in the middle of that, and I like the egregore, I wrote a story on that one time, and it's this spirit that occupies everyone, that's conditioned to believe in evil things. And it got me thinking about World War II, and that the desire to destroy Germany was not entirely economic, even though they'd achieved pretty much economic freedom in a very short period of time, and embarrassed the international bankers by finding prosperity by trusting the people, which is the last thing the bankers want to happen. But there was a spiritual element to that too, where when people would observe the success that took place in Germany in such a short period of time, they realized that the oppressors in the United States, Britain, and Russia realized that if they didn't destroy that, their whole world edifice would come tumbling down. So that the result of World War II, in many ways, considering the situation we're in today, was the last chance we had to escape this monstrous plan of the demiurge to turn us all into slaves and totally erase and stifle all inclination we might have to achieve a spiritual health and a finer balance between men and women than we have achieved to this point. And it's like it was a path away from slavery that they were stopping because it would have destroyed them. And now we've got the same stuff on the line when we've got Klaus Schwab and especially we had such a wonderful talk the other day, and I had that initial epiphany about how the real Jewish God is artificial intelligence, where they can make it anything they want to make it, and yet to follow the dictates of artificial intelligence is going to destroy all of humanity, and we're definitely on that track right now.
Yeah, the redeeming quality, or the redemption, I guess if you want to call it, spiritually, of everyone and everything on earth is that they'll pretty much bring about their own destruction through that process. And Hitler pretty much, according to Serrano, had won in the spiritual already by making that sacrifice, by winning by losing, because they lost in the material plane by not using the explosively generated technology of violence that this other group, like the Hidden Hand, uses.
Yeah.
They used instead, they deliberately refused to use the atom bomb, and apparently, according to what Serrano says, there was only maybe 3 to 5 nuclear weapons that were actually made, nuclear bombs, and that it's basically just a scam to hold the world hostage, to say mutually assured destruction. If you don't go along with our global government, we may as well, it's the only way.
Loki, I need to interrupt your narrative for an introduction of Patriot Pat into one of his favorite topics, which is nuclear bombs. Pat?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, John. Yes, I believe the whole nuclear weaponry is a scam. I was a nuclear reactor operator in the Navy for years, and so I know that nuclear power does exist. And I believe that what happened at the Manhattan Project is that they were attempting to make these nuclear bombs, but discovered that there was a great source of energy and power, and that's where the nuclear reactors came from. And we've seen from pictures, at least I have, of tons and tons and tons and thousands of tons of dynamite being loaded at these locations where they had these phony test sites. Phony in the fact that they weren't nuclear. It was simply dynamite, TNT, and explosives. And when you look at Los Alamos out there where they did the testing, there's right after, or within a day or hours after the huge explosion, the experiment, it was exploded on a tower maybe 100 feet high or so, and they were all walking around out there. In fact, the land right at the dead center of point blank range, there it was humped up instead of a huge crater being there. So there's so many elements into it that just exposes the fraud of all of the nuclear weapon systems, and they just won't work, and they haven't found them yet. And by the way, why in the world would they have two totally different designs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? One was long like a torpedo, and the other one was a huge egg shape. If one was supposed to work good, why weren't they both the same design? It doesn't make any sense at all once you start looking at it.
Yeah, there's a good website called big-lies.org, I think it is, that discusses that also, quite a lot of detail about how nuclear bombs are just a myth, like a sort of gun to put to people's head to force them to capitulate and bow to the world order and its agenda. And I think in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they basically just used fire bombs, and then since the city was made of wood, it just ignited, so it
That's exactly right. Yes, and there were many flights. It wasn't just two airplanes, one at Nagasaki and one at Hiroshima. There were numerous sorties, numerous flights sent with fire bombs, and those fire bombs with aluminum, magnesium, and phosphorus, they burn anything in their path. And if you look at them at close range, even if you were dropping one of those bombs and it ignited a few hundred yards below you, if you looked at it, it might danger your eyes because it is very bright. I saw that in our practices in Vieques during NAM, that they would send up those phosphorus magnesium bombs or flares, huge flares that lit up the whole island of Vieques, and they were hundreds of yards above the island. So they were very bright. Yeah, there was bright flashes, but they were fire bombs. And as a matter of fact, some churches were left standing, some buildings were left standing. There was all kinds of buildings left standing, and they all should have been. They were at ground zero. They should have been wiped clean. But you're right. A lot of the Japanese structures were bamboo and rice paper. And one of the friends of mine on the submarine, when he was stationed over in Japan, he got the nickname of Tank Young, and because they were fighting in a bar, and the shore patrol came after him, and he said, "Follow me, boys," and he just ran through the wall to the outside because it was rice paper and bamboo. It was flimsy buildings in the main.
Miguel Serrano wrote in his book, The Ultimate Avatar, the Jews have been preparing the so-called New World Order since the beginning of history. The global consumer culture is the means of achieving it. It's already here. With the end of Bolshevik Russia, international capitalism is destroying national borders and sovereign states. Soon after this will come the end of capitalism, of paper, of plastic, and electronic money. The technotronic and electronic and cybertronic globalism will serve very well to impose the theocratic Jehovah/Yahweh world dictatorship, together with virtual reality and computer technology. With virtual reality, the Jews think they have discovered a magic device capable of striking the last mortal blow to actual reality or to Mother Nature in a way that even nature can't defend herself and be destroyed with all the rest. I hope you will understand this satanic and horrific or diabolical plan. In connection with all of this, I would like to state very clearly that I am absolutely against people or innocents who, on the edge of an abyss, are playing like children with the words Satanism and diabolical, and even worse, mixing all of this with Nazism and Hitlerism. Many Satanists do not know that they are manipulated psychotronically and in fact hypnotized by the CIA, Mossad, and other such organizations. And of course, all of this has led to today of the adjective Nazi being a synonym for everything that's evil in the world, when in fact the psychological and philosophical objectives of the Nazis was to elevate humanity into a much more conscious effort to understand itself than the Judeo-Christian Muslim effort to turn us into little robots obeying what people are saying from the top. And now I think, how do we get people, Loki, to see what they have left behind by sucking into all this globalist, everybody loves to call them globalists, propaganda that makes us want to stop thinking and just do what we are told, what is the best way? It seems to me that kernels of trying to reverse this trend are in believing in this it's almost another realm. It's a belief system that believes in spirit, and you can't quantify it. How are we going to turn this around? Do you have any idea?
Well, Serrano's got a lot of ideas. He's basically is advocating a shift of consciousness away from the rationalist, materialist, left brain, purely what I would call demiurgic consciousness. This sort of limited, like today, most people, they're either on the one hand emotionally unstable, living in a sort of animal mind state of consciousness where everything is just pure emotion and feelings, and on the other hand, they might attain a state of sort of rationalistic calculus, this sort of demiurgic consciousness where everything is just robotic, logical. Everything is purely based upon scientism as their religion, and
Right.
the atheistic, materialistic worldview. And I think it depends for collectives or for individuals or both. Spreading Serrano's message around is a good idea. In terms of reaching people, in terms of self-development and self-awareness, Serrano's whole project is oriented in that direction, especially, well, in most of his works he discusses it in Resurrection of the Hero also. That is basically sort of like a more basic template of transmutation of the consciousness through usage of alchemical transmutation of yoga and tantric yoga and magic in that sense, not in the black magic sense like he was referring to Satan and Satanism, but not fearing that in the Christian sense or in that sort of fear porn sense where anything that entails any sort of magical or spiritual practices or exercises is evil and bad. This is just a question of what is harmonious, what is inharmonious, and not developing your soul, not integrating your soul, integrating the, if you want to call it the opposite modality of your consciousness, affirming your gender for an anatomical male to, incorporate within himself through developing that aspect of his consciousness, the sacred feminine, and then for a female to be more oriented toward devotion toward the male, having a more balanced consciousness in both cases.
That could be a whole show, and I was really impressed by that. It's hard to explain, but instead of having this pie in the sky, all-powerful deity to worship, worshiping your spouse, who was really chosen by the deity, if you have the right spouse, is a far more worthwhile endeavor than kneeling down before some shrine, which is what the demiurge has going for it. I was going to ask you this. The main question then becomes how humans were and supposed to be as opposed to now, where they're totally empirical without a trace of spirit, and that's been the globalist objective all this time. Serrano writes, this was the labor of Hitler, the avatar of the Hyperborean architect in the Aryan collective unconscious, intending to restore the golden age, the perfect world that has been lost, which was made possible in some sense with victory and defeat. It is now a question of time, working within this time and space, because these things that work from eternity can only give their fruits here below in time. And this leads me to a number of questions that I find in Serrano, being, kind of a typical American, brought up with the all of the baloney that is pounded into us from schools and churches. But how could there ever be victory in the defeat that he suffered, where it seemed to have at Dunkirk a way of totally obliterating the British forces, and that has, as time has passed, has led many Hebrew commentators to say, "Oh, he was really a Jew, and he threw the war right there and caused the defeat of Germany."
I think it's mainly just because the archetype, Hitler as an archetype or as an avatar, it accorded with karmic law, that it was something, he didn't seek to violate the laws of the cosmos by aggressively forcing himself on others, such as the hidden hand, the black magicians, is their typical modus operandi, where they pretend, they force themselves on people and then they claim they're giving them a choice. Join us or die. That's pretty much what their choice is. The distinction is between live and let live, which is the worldview of the Aryan, and live and let die, which is basically the worldview of the demiurge, a violent explosion, imposition or superimposition upon others, and coercion, coercively trying to get your way, which only gets you your way in the spirit, in the material plane, because you're creating karma spiritually through inharmonious and aggressively violent action. And so because you're achieving things only in this brute level, according to the law of entropy, that's not going to generate any positive consequences at any higher level. It's just going to reverberate against you karmically. Every action has a reaction equal and opposite thereto. And then you're going to just incur more and more karma. And then when you reincarnate in the cycles, which is the only way in which this group can really attain power or even exist, because they can't ascend, because they're too mixed, too hybridized in their blood, and so they don't have that quality or essence that the Aryan has. And so for that reason, their only hope for continuing themselves is ultimately machine, sort of mechs and transhumanism, where they want to have their soul somehow impossibly intertwined with mechanics and literally robotized, so that they can continue to sense and experience the material plane and its pleasures and amusements. And so because of that, because they follow that path of materialism, hedonism, materialism, worldliness, if you want to call it, they basically bring about their own continued downward spiral of entropy, which will basically lead to their non-existence one way or the other.
American karma. I was just thinking about American karma is not so hot right at the present time.
Yeah, it's inevitably like karma works in that causal sense of cyclicism, that the agents of certain nations are the representatives of it, or the archetype of it, I guess we could say, and they, as an instrument of that nation, of the collective culture organism, they create chaos, and then they receive the chaos in whatever form at a later point. It manifests over the incarnations according to the laws of karma, which cannot really be adequately known by people, by finite, fallible beings. But just to get back to the question you were saying about what can we do in terms of escaping this wheel of incarnation, or Ixion's wheel, to spiritualize the material, we can focus on, as Serrano advises, magic, poetry, music, the music of the spheres, like Bach or Mozart, or music that is basically harmonious, consistent with more uplifting polyrhythmic music. Myself, I listen to a lot of Baroque harpsichord music.
Amen.
Because I think that is really the height of music, that is
Yes.
available to us now. It might not have been historically, there might have been much more profound and spiritually developmental music, but that is the best that we can do now that still exists, preferably music which is played by people who are similar to those who composed it, like Aryans, instead of now they try to just have the musician be some Oriental or whatever the case. They're trying.
The Israeli orchestras have taken over all of the Baroque music, and it's so wooden and soulless. But we won't get into that. We are headed toward the break, and I just wanted to tell people that we're going to take calls in the second hour. Anybody who's got something to say about what we're talking about. And the number is area code 605-562-0400. When you reach the first plateau, you have a code to punch in, and that's 811-7272, and then the pound sign. And I'll repeat that number because everybody's told me I should, because that gives people time to get a pencil. 605-562-0400. with a code of 811-7272 and the pound sign. And we look forward to your calls. It's wonderful you've read all these other Serrano books. It took me 6 months to plow my way through the Ultimate Avatar, and as I say, I have like 5 files of all sorts of notes, and it's probably I'll spend the rest of my life reading parts of it and trying to understand all of the things he talked about. He talked about something. I'm more interested in ancient history than anything else, because I just want to know how we got to be the way that we are, and finding out that the white race seems to have come in some sort of magical way from the North Pole when the conditions on the planet were very different. And then with basically using the work of the Aurolinda book and Herman Wirth and Tilak, we discover that the white race came down through Central Asia and populated all these ancient cultures in a kind of dominant way because they seem to have been more advanced. And of course now we have a complete reversal of that, where thanks to our friends in the Middle East, we have blacks being brought into all countries to destabilize the countries and demanding to be treated equally when their cultures simply have never been the equal of the white cultures. But now it's like the world is sinking into a swamp that is abetted and assisted by the religious structures that have been set up by the demiurge. And it's like all these people who are trapped in these misbegotten myths are participating in their own destruction.
Right, it's basically suicide programming is what I look upon Abrahamic religion.
That's a good way to put it. So my question becomes to you, how do you begin to address this puzzle to people who believe that the Nazis were bad people and deserve to be destroyed, and all the people at Dresden deserve to be burned to death by these crazy Americans? How do you begin to, if it's possible at all, to turn their thinking around and realize that the potential that humans really have has been so twisted and misshapen and mutilated by these belief systems that are really mind control devices for slaves rather than paths to enlightenment and resurrection?
Well, I think that the only solution is basically a twofold solution for their awakening. One is to try to awaken them through cultural means, through the spread of their ancestral culture that still exists, and through what a lot of people are trying to do, archaeology of knowledge in the sense of Foucault, trying to bring back, trying to get to the truth of history and expose the lies of history, historical revisionists and people like that, but also those who are more archaeologically oriented, like the Ananurba were with Herman Wirth.
Right.
And in contemporary times, there are similar theorists who are bringing out the information and showing that, the historical reality is not that we all came out of apes in the jungle in Africa and magically and possibly became totally different just because of some sort of climate conditions or whatever the case, even though there's no missing link between man and ape and there's no sign of any sort of evolutionary phases or developments, no links between different species. So obviously that's not true, but that doesn't imply that because Darwinian ideology is false, that we should just leap into the Christian or Abrahamic worldview where everything somehow is created equally out of the demiurge, which is idiocy, because obviously nothing is equal at all at any dimension or at any level of existence. Spiritually, the soul is a different type. Some of them are more powerful, some of them are weaker, different energetic patterns. The soul of a Negro isn't the same as the soul of an Inuit, or the soul of a Chinese isn't the same as the soul of an Arab or whatever particular group. Everything is totally different. It's differentiated manifestation. If you're trying to pose it equality, then the only thing you're affirming is that it's just an abstract concept, So the typical person says, "Oh, humanity! Just think of humanity," which becomes a substitute for so-called God, right? It's just like another abstraction, rationalist abstraction, a universalist concept that has nothing to do with reality, and that is just the mind control mechanism. All you have to do is just pair that concept through classical conditioning with a repetition, a lot of emotion. So they make it a false association between a lot of emotional feelings and these concepts, so that anybody who ever questions these concepts or puts forth different concepts that conflict with it, they're immediately retaliated against through aggression, because it triggers their emotional brains. That's how they're conditioned to live their lives. Like most Christians, they're all living in their minds in the emotional brain, and at most they can become a rational robot, a scientist or whatever the case. They can add and subtract numbers, which themselves are not, according to Serrano, archetypal numbers. They're numbers of basically accountancy, which derive from the Middle East. Numerology in a Kabbalistic sense of not Aryan original Kabbalah, Orphic Kabbalah, or Egyptian Hermetic Kabbalah. They're basically plagiaristic distortions on the part of this group, who basically tangled it up with their own and then put themselves on a pedestal as this master race and demanded that everybody venerate them. So what can we do? We can basically just try to rekindle the blood memory of our Aryan ancestors, and we can pose it, the race idea, race and nation, say, this is your ancestry, this is who you are, this is the origins, the historical reality based on evidence and fact. Different regions of the earth, they have different cultures. Maybe the current races who live there aren't the ones who formed the culture, such as in Tibet or Japan. Maybe the original, or in India, the original one was Aryan, but they became mixed, and now here's the culture, as it distilled into a remnant of that sort of original form. So that doesn't mean that Aryans should adopt those cultures, Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever it may be. They should instead just go back to their origins to the extent that we can get to that, which is basically Hermeticism, if you want to call it that, which is a tradition of the Aryan race.
I was struck by the notion that that Krishna is generally painted as a blue person, and it made me think that maybe those people who came out of the Arctic such a long time ago were blue. In any case, we're headed toward the break. Got a couple more minutes. The call-in number is 605-562-0400. with a code of 811-7272 and the pound sign. And I want to be sure and tell everyone that if you like this interview and want to send it to a friend, it's going to be recorded in the podcast section of the Speak Free Radio website. speakfreeradio.com. And we want to thank you all for listening. Pat, what's your take on what we're trying to accomplish here? And do you think people are ready and able to understand the fact that if they're able to transcend their own religion, maybe they can find a better system somewhere else?
Well, thank you for asking. As I've always said, the unlearning is harder than the learning.
Right.
And we've been so programmed in the wrong direction. You know, the template is right in front of us, and that is to go back and see exactly what Hitler did to turn around Germany. I remember Elizabeth Dilling saying that she visited Germany in 1931, and it was kind of a slavishly inhabited people, that they didn't take care of themselves. And then she revisited in 1938, and she said it was a utopia. It was 180 degrees turned around. It was almost a perfect world, a perfect country. Everybody was happy, and of course that was before the Great War there. But so Hitler was on to something, and if we would go back and look and examine thoroughly exactly what he did, and then somehow try to convince people to unlearn all of the horrible stories that's been told, that would go a long way toward do some sort of a plan.
Good deal. We'll see you all after the break, and with your phone calls, I hope, with Loki and Kaminski going not too ballistic. Welcome back, everybody, to Kaminski Goes Ballistic. We're having a great conversation about Hyperborea and Adolf Hitler and how we think the world should be. And if you care to join our conversation, you could call us up at area code 605-562-0400 with a code to follow. That's 811-7272 and the pound sign. So, where did we leave off? It was, we could go back to the Gobi Desert, and which a civilization hardly anybody knows about. The Aryans who conquered India after the catastrophic destruction of their civilization in the Gobi, in order not to mix with the aboriginal colored peoples of the Indian subcontinent, with the daughters of the earth, they created a Varna system in which color was the most important aspect.
Right.
And which meant the preservation of the blue-white Hyperborean color, which is why I mentioned Krishna in a lot of the ancient Indian art as painted as a blue person.
Interestingly enough, I have a picture of that on my fridge.
Excellent. And now Aryan means the twice born. It's about keeping the blood pure. And apparently not doing that has been the cause of many, if not most, of our disasters. The memory of the blood through which contact with the divine Hyperborean polar ancestors was preserved. And one of the things I've discovered that has convinced me of the legitimacy of this is a Hindu politician and writer who has a very long name, the last part of which is Tilak, wrote a book called The Arctic Home in the Vedas, and it made known available evidence in the ancient sacred Vedic texts that the primeval home of the Aryans was the North Pole. And how he proves that in his book is he examines the description of sunrise that took 4 months. And the only place a sunrise takes 4 months is in the Arctic. This gives the big lie to one of many that has been pounded into our brains over time, that we all came out of Africa. And it's pretty clear that a Swede with blonde hair and blue eyes did not come out of Africa.
Well, it's also pretty clear just by observing physiognomy, because their physiognomy, their facial structure and skeletal structure, and all the endless 1,000 points of biological difference based on mainstream biology are radically different. So there's no possibility that that could ever be somehow magically attributed to climate or environmental changes.
A question I've written down here is, where and when was Hyperborea, and where is it now? And the note I have with that is the avatar, the idea of an avatar, is a projection of Hyperborea. The difference between a demiurgic archetype and a Hyperborean avatar is that the latter is a projection of the Siddhas to help rescue the heroes from the infernal wheel of eternal return of the Kalpas, Manvantaras, and Yugas, from the respiration of the demiurge Brahma, Yahweh. Now, including Brahma in all of this means that all of the gods, because since he was like the first one, that all of the gods of history have been products of this demiurge and have trapped us in this worship of a person or a force that is imprisoning us in something that's turning us into slaves rather than increasing our chances to become what, Loki?
Well, basically all those religions, those dogmas, are pretty much formulas of black magic to spiritually disempower people, and you can just observe that by their fruits. In the case of Hinduism, everyone's forced to be like a vegetarian, having nothing but a little cup of milk or something like that.
Yeah.
All of these religions are slave religions, and they always want everybody to be this sort of weak, decrepit, unintelligent, ignorant, and spiritually dead person who just sits around praising and worshiping. And that's the ticket to paradise that is offered to people, that people need only bow and scrape and worship and not focus on developing themselves through alchemical means, through actual spiritual practices, to awakening the chakras or balancing your chakras and empowering yourself through yoga and so on. And so you become basically nothing but a robot circling around the wheel of incarnation, of entropy, and then it just leads to your gradual extinction over time and your soul being vampirized by these entities that the hidden hand work with.
Sounds like a Joe Biden voter.
Yeah. Sounds like somebody's trying to call in.
Oh, I better check my list here. Oh, there's a call. How about that? Oh, what happened? Hi, you're on Speak Free Radio.
Hello.
832. Hello.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Kaminski. You got some very interesting individuals there, historians. There's Miguel, who wrote the Terracotta Warriors, and he examined all of these artifacts, and they're very high. Let's take the Terracotta Warriors. All these Terracotta Warriors are all, each of them are unique.
Sure.
And they have little codes.
Sure.
That they talk about, the fact the herders and all that, the fact that they talk about the super science of the sun.
Sir, let me ask you something. Well, stop. Can you take the phone a little further away from your mouth, because you're coming through kind of garbled? Speak a little more softly and move away from your mouth, so it will clarify what you're saying and help us understand. Go ahead.
Okay. So these could have examined, the Mayans, all of the artifacts of the Book of the Dead, the Mayan Book of the Dead.
Uh-huh.
These things were extremely, we call it Mayan transformers. These take like a computer to do what you recreate, like the tomb of Lord Pascal. It is so intricate, multi-layer. It's like a miracle. Something like Tutankhamun. It is so intricate and so layered with information.
Right.
Atomic numbers, all these things. You can go to, there's a book called The Code. The movie 5 hours is called The Code. And whoever designed, who laid out all of these ancient Stonehenge, the pyramids, the Mayan temples, they all are exactly coordinated, and they're all according to the English foot, which is absolutely bizarre, because you have cubits, you have metric, you have all kinds of ways you can measure, but they're all in feet. And all of the dimensions of these, like Stonehenge, will also give you the grid coordinates in seconds, minutes, and seconds.
Yes.
Latitude and longitude. It is completely in sync. It's mind-blowing when you look at it, because numbers speak louder than words. And they also coincide with Sidonia on Mars, and the face of Mars also faces coincides with the Sphinx, also with other artifacts here on Earth. And when you look at all that totality, this is all laid out 10,000 BC, and it's all completely, I mean, you're talking about 10 decimal points exact grid coordinates, exact measurements of all these artifacts, Stonehenge.
You're absolutely right.
Look at all that y'all go.
The ancient architecture Thank you very much. The ancient architecture is so astonishing that Carl Herman, a teacher in Los Angeles, has done a lot of great work on this at Luxor in Egypt, and done analyses of the statuary, 60-foot tall statues of Ramses there that couldn't be produced today for their geometric accuracy. And it's just, becoming very clear, and Loki, you may have something to say about this, that the ancient architecture and technology is in many ways superior to what we have today.
Absolutely. It's pretty clear that the technology of today is based on explosively generated electricity or power, which is demiurgic, and the power generator utilized by Aryans historically and off-planet, and we'll get into that too, hopefully, is based on implosively generated energy power systems, like the Hanabu, the Nazi Bell,
Right.
Hitler's UFOs. I was just reading yesterday Hitler's UFOs against the New World Order, and there's a quotation there. Your guest just mentioned Mars. From Serrano, he says, bases already exist on the moon and Mars. They are the bases of the Hitlerists who already are on Venus. So, in other words, that according to what he had said too in another passage, we had already won in this solar system in terms of the more cosmic war, and that we do not just emanate from some devias only in the sense of like a theosophical Madame Blavatsky type of involution. We basically derive from off-planet, and I suspect somewhere maybe in Sirius B, which is
The Dogon, yeah.
which is correlated with the black sun, possibly as a sort of astral tube for astral travel. And basically these bases on the moon, you know, there's copious evidence to prove that Mars was actually civilized, and there's all sorts of architecture all over Mars, such as the disinformation agent Joseph P. Farrell's book,
Right.
the whatever it's called, I forget, the war something. And then there's also the face on Mars and so forth. John Hoagland, I think his name is.
Yeah, Hoagland. That's been debunked, though. That's not really a face. Tell us about the Black Sun.
Well, so far as I understand, the Black Sun, there's a work called by an occultist from around the time of the National Socialists and before. It was written in 1910 by Perit Shou, S-H-O-U, and he was affiliated with Aleister Crowley. And I think he was actually put in concentration camps by the National Socialists and executed. But he wrote a short work, a 50 or so page work called The Mystery of the Central Sun. And the central sun is basically the black sun, so far as I understand. And that's basically like the galactic center out of which what we could call maybe the Christ ray emanates. according to him, Perit Shu. And this basically, it's sort of related to the cycles of time, like the solar system travels through the galactic plane around the galactic center in a pattern that brings it closer or further to it. And the closer it is, the more of this vril, or odic force, or chi, call it what you want, this energy, black sun, comes and radiates upon the earth and facilitates its increased maybe vibrational frequency. So, and that is basically correlated with the hollow earth as well. According to Serrano, you can't really visit the hollow earth in physical form, apparently. It might be maybe a slightly different dimension, or it's not possible, not accessible, but I'm not too sure about that. But the black sun is basically related to that. You see the northern lights in the northern hemisphere. That is basically a result of the aurora borealis, is a result of the central sun within the hollow earth projecting outwards from the poles and projecting it into the atmosphere, so that you see the radiance of the light from there.
The Thunderbolts guys would disagree with that. They say it's the energy from the sun coming to the earth.
There's the black sun, which is apparently a sun behind the sun. There's a visible sun and there's a black sun. And the black sun, according to some sources I've read, is basically just located where the sun is. But the sun, from other sources I've read, is actually a black hole that is sort of like like I had said before about an astral tube from Sirius B to possibly correlated with Venus and the sun, that it enables space travel from the distant constellation of Orion, where Sirius B is, and then they can come through the sun. And NASA has photographed like black cube ships coming into the solar system. But if you want to trust NASA, I mean, I'm not too sure I would trust that entirely. But so far as I understand, the metaphysics, or the astrophysics of this, the metaphysical forces, is basically the black sun is a radiation or emanation from the central sun, or the galactic center. So the closer our solar system goes toward that, the more the vibrational frequency increases on the earth, because we're being bombarded by this maybe magnetism, this force, which helps to awaken maybe the blood memory of the Aryan, because we are not from this planet originally, at least our ancestors, those who are more pure and not interbred with the animals, the anthropoid beast men, which basically are the hybrids now, who are not white. They're pretty much hybridized with Aryans to varying degrees. So that's sort of like the anthropogenesis of this earth, of the different creatures, different beings, the involution of the devias. And it's like it's hard to tell who's who without a scorecard. But I'm the fellows who came in and mated with the daughters of men were the aliens, and they are the Aryans. Is that the deal? No, they were called Aryan later. Before that, I guess they were just Hyperboreans, or the Devias. What name they had. It's confusing, because different sources say slightly different things. Like you have Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, volumes 1 and 2. Anthropogenesis and cosmogenesis. And in anthropogenesis, she speaks about them being more like, more non-physical beings. And then there are other sources that simply claim that they're more or less Nordic aliens that come from Sirius B, from around that region. In Mormonism, I've heard that Kolob is the planet that these beings allegedly come from. If you look on like a BitChute, you'll type in banned Mormon cartoon, you see the story of Mormonism. It shows in cartoon form white people from like another planet, that they're sending out people from there, and they come to the Earth, and then they're in the Americas, and then they get killed by the Indians here, which is historically proven that white people at least were here millennia ago, 12,500 years ago from Atlantis, or
That happened to the Celts, not the Celts, but the Scandinavians who came to the New World had a rough time dealing with the Indians, and they went home.
That was at a later time, but there's a book.
Yeah.
There's a book called Vinlanders from the 55clubbooks.com, which discusses in copious detail the historical, archaeological sources that prove that we were here pretty much 12,500 years ago. That was during the time when Atlantis was undergoing cataclysms because of the pole shift. And so people came, and Serrano speaks about this in copious detail as well, especially with respect to South America, which is his
I was just
region.
thinking that the Visigoths in Peru, yes.
Yeah, and the thing is, before that time even, we were in the Americas thousands of years ago, and that's what created Machu Picchu and Tiwanaku, and in Mexico, Tenochtitlan.
Yeah.
All of these ancient cities were created by us, all these pyramid cultures, because it's the same pyramid everywhere on Earth, the same geometrical proportions. So the dark forces of this world, they want to try to twist it to create a staged alien invasion. They want to make this appearance like all these ancient civilizations, ancient aliens like Graham Hancock or whatever the case, but it's actually ancient Aryans like, what's his name?
It's funny.
Patrick Chouinard.
Yes. Have you chanced to cross Jason Brashears yet?
I think you referred me to him.
Yeah, he's the Archaics guys, and he believes that these folks from way back when are ensconced in the hollow earth and are posing as aliens to confuse us, but they're in complete control of us, minions on the face of the earth.
I would call that disinformation, because the hollow earth, as Serrano had spoken of many times, Neue Schwabenland, Hitler and the National Socialists, they had already had contingency plans, and they went to the hollow earth through Antarctica. This is proven through 1946 flight of Admiral Richard Byrd, the U.S. admiral who tried to fly in after the National Socialists into the hollow earth, and then he was done away with, or eventually was executed, probably because he knew too much, probably executed by Mossad or something like that. And so, it's proven that Admiral Donitz and various other National Socialists, they had the submarines, they were already stationed there, and they built bases in Neuschwabenland, and nobody has ever been there since, and never goes there. And the reason why is because it's obviously their controlled enclave, and that's good, because obviously they are the good. They're just portrayed as the antithesis by the controllers of this world, who are really basically just controllers on this earth plane, using mind control and advanced technology to manipulate people's consciousness, to invert reality and put themselves in the position of the good, when in reality they're the evil of this world. The black magicians, the Freemasons, and all their Illuminist affiliates, which are the exact opposite of National Socialists, because the National Socialists opposed them. And they shut down all the Freemason lodges, same within fascist Italy, same within Hungary with the Arrow Cross Party. They did away with the Freemasons there. So the Freemasons are tied in with this master race group. They're controlled by B'nai B'rith out of New York City, which was, I think, Leo Frank, the child murderer, was the head of B'nai B'rith, at least in Georgia. So basically it's inversion. They portray themselves as good when they're obviously not good, and nothing they do is original or creative. It's just a plagiary.
Down to this very day, yep.
By the way, I'd like to say that the first third party in the United States was the Anti-Mason Party, and they almost got their president elected. and Captain Morgan was murdered by the Masons, and that's what fomented the hatred against the Masons, and to have them form this anti-Mason party, and they damn near won.
Yeah, a lot of presidents in the United States were assassinated around, especially just around Lincoln's time and after that, like McKinley and President Garfield and things.
Garfield, yeah.
They were all assassinated because they were trying to oppose the Federal Reserve System, or oppose the cabal in one way or the other. So they were not tolerated, even though they might have been Freemasons themselves. But I guess they realized that they cannot serve two masters. They can't serve those who wish to enslave the world and at the same time have a decent world to live in. So maybe they recognized they were deceived. Just like Mozart, and Serrano had spoken of Mozart as well. He was apparently
34.
1 degree or not, a 33 degree Mason or something of that sort. And then he was trying to reveal the true Hermetic doctrine in the form of the Queen of the Night, or his opera with Papageno and Papagena, and that's the story of the involution of the devias into the animal men. So he was revealing that, and then they assassinated Mozart. I think he was like 27 years old actually when he was assassinated. And that's typically when the cabal assassinates people, like musicians especially. 2 and 7 is 9, which is completion in their Kabbalistic rituals. Kurt Cobain of Nirvana was assassinated then, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Buddy Holly, a variety of all these musicians were right at that time, at the age of 27. So that's basically the role they played. But I think in the case of Mozart and people like this, they wanted to, reveal the true doctrine, and William Morgan and so forth, maybe to a lesser extent. But then they were done away with because they had known too much. Just like in the movie Occult Forces, that French movie, the guy who made that, he was assassinated right after, and so were the other people who worked on that movie.
The Gray State, yeah.
No, his name was like Paul Rassinier, I think, or something.
Oh, okay.
That's for the movie Forces Occult in French. Occult Forces from 1943, I think it was. It's a French film, which shows, like, it reveals the connection between Masonry and this other group.
How much do you know about Herman Worth?
Well, I know that Serrano discusses him a lot, as does Julius Evola in a lot of his works. And basically, Herman Worth was a little bit deceived because he fell into this sort of J.J. Bachhofen, the mother goddess. He wrote a work called Das Mutterrecht, or the Mother State, where he
myth. Yeah, wrote that a white queen ruled Atlantis. Mo-Uru, the myth of Gaia, refers to the virgin goddess who, without need of a man, gave birth to a son who was later her husband. Is that the one?
I'm not really too familiar with it, but I know that the perspective that Worth had was basically a sort of matriarchal perspective, which is a distortion because the ancient Aryan tradition was never matriarchal. It was always basically the sort of solar phallic, solar Uranian spirituality, always about the spirituality and the divine. Sounds like someone's calling in or something.
That's a message, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So basically, Herman Worth had the wrong idea. He got it confused. And I think actually he was taken from the Ananurba by, it might have been Himmler or whomever else, I don't remember exactly, but they took him out of it because of that, because he was distorting their more patriarchal orientation with the Führer. And I think even in South America, in ancient South America, the Aryans who were there, they had the Chinchacona, I think it might have been called, which is the leader. It's the same thing, the same sort of concept that was always present in the Aryan tradition and civilization. it's only in civilizations that are more like the sort of Semitic and Near Eastern, Mediterranean, the earliest stocks of that, and then the stocks which came from Lemuria, the sunken continent, that became like Dravidian India and stuff, the Negroes in southern India,
Yeah.
that was basically matriarchal. Because matriarchal is sort of like, matriarchy is sort of like a primitive Mother Earth goddess type of thing, whereas the sacred feminine is not about the earthly Eve. It's about, like Serrano would call Lilith, which is, you know, the sacred feminine consciousness, which is not about like an earthly, materialistic, chthonic type of mentality, but something elevated above that, and is elevated above that through its relationship with the patriarchal structure and the divine masculine.
What do you know about the Thule Society today?
In
Thule.
terms of it being existent today, I wouldn't know if it exists at all, but so far as I know, it was like a legitimate organization that was, whose memberships were, I believe, Rudolf Hess,
Yeah.
and Hitler and Dietrich Eckart, as well as possibly Karl Maria Willigut, various other of these occultists, that many of whom they sort of disbanded it, and then they became the SS Black Order, which was like a super secret order within the SS that was fighting the occult war. But it's hard to find out any real detail, although Serrano does speak about these sorts of things. I think it's in Ultimate Avatar, which is actually, I think the proper translation is the last avatar, not the ultimate, because ultimo in Spanish is last.
Well, Serrano says he's coming back as Kalki to lead us to victory.
Yeah, but what he's maybe referring to with the last avatar conception is that it's Adolf Hitler as the last of this sort of sequence of material figures of men who become avatared. I'm not really too sure. It's difficult to say, but I know that in Spanish, la última is like the last.
Right. That's
so
right.
I'm pretty sure that's a correct translation. But in the Ultimate Avatar, he basically discusses a lot about the history of the National Socialists from the more esoteric perspective.
Well, I've observed politically, in my less than enlightened viewpoint about world history, that it seems like Hitler's efforts in trying to escape the Jewish World Bank was like our last shot at escaping the monsters who are busily doing away with us today.
Yeah, I think basically, ultimately, the conclusion of Serrano is that the only thing you can do is just to stand and fight, and then just, try to eliminate the problem, but that you'll basically exist in a different dimension, that it's really, there is nothing that you can do to really overcome it yourself. But it may very well be the case that the last battalion, the Wildes here, wild hordes of Odin, are these Germans who went to the Hollow Earth and who built military bases there, as well as having bases on different planets, perhaps in a different dimension, because that's the whole notion of becoming the absolute personality, or the absolute man, the sun and mensch, or the sun man, or the Superman, is pretty much that you retain immortality, the diamond body of immortal Vajra, which is that you've basically become a fully integrated soul. You've unified all the different aspects, you've integrated them into yourself in a sort of like closed system that you've formed through tantric alchemy and through basically control over yourself, over the sum total of all the elements of your being that have become integrated together. And so you become more or less immortal, and then you're existing in different dimension, or maybe you can, come in and out of different dimensions because you develop those sorts of spiritual powers. And so that may very well be the case. Like the SS, they had their Lebensborn, which was not about purely physical breeding. It was about tantric alchemy. Like they were developing themselves. They were absorbing the female energy into themselves through implosively generating energy, not ejaculating in their sexual activity. They were basically, building up that energy within themselves, and then they were basically amplifying their souls or strengthening it. And so that probably was the real function of the Lebensborn, where the SS were involved in those activities, and then they could basically leave this physical dimension. And of course they did and do have the Hanabu, the UFOs, Hitler's UFOs against the New World Order, that actually exist and have proven to be existent purely on a mainstream or semi-mainstream scientific basis, if they're to be understood in that way. The book The Final Battalion from 55clubbooks.com is pretty useful in understanding the particular physics, implosively generated, I don't know what you'd call it, the physics of implosion, or maybe metaphysics, which is in a way magic, because it deals with the acausal and the causal. It's beyond the spatio-temporal.
Are you talking about Schauberger here at all?
Yeah, Victor Schauberger. And that's also, similar to Nikola Tesla and various of these others. In Florida too, they've got Ed Leeds Skalnin's Coral Castle, which was built by this Latvian guy.
Yeah.
Through kymatics, through energy. He basically used his thought energy to make it.
Wow.
So that's the same with ancient Egypt and the building of the pyramids. They utilized magic in that sense because they developed higher powers and were able to control energy and through sound to create this using, I guess, what's called 0-point energy in today's.
There's a lot of cymatics talk around now. I have a faculty of telepathy, and I happen to know a lady who's listening to us who I was wishing would call in, because I'm sure she has any number of questions about Don Miguel Serrano, who she happened to know in person. And I just got a note from her, and I'm thinking it's time that she called in with a question. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
I'd like to ask a question, if you
Yes,
don't mind.
please.
Loki, do you have any idea or realize why Hitler wanted to go to North Africa? But was there something about the power there, the pyramids there, or was it purely for material reasons, looking for resources, building a railroad down towards Egypt? Can you enlighten us any way there?
I don't really know very much about the historical details of that, but I suspect, or would speculate, that probably it has to do with the energies of the pyramids and like it being a sacred site. Because all of these structures are built on ley lines which tap into energy, and the pyramids, of course, as everybody probably knows, are like the king's chamber is directed towards Sirius, so that it receives the rays from Sirius. And they're arrayed in like a seven pyramid configuration, which mimics the Pleiades in the Orion constellation. So I'm thinking.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I'm thinking that it's probably the case that there was a spiritual purpose for which he went there. I personally don't really know very much about it, but I know after the Second World War, people like Johann von Leers, who was one of the major propagandists and member of the Ahnenerbe, he went to Egypt through the Rat Line with a lot of other National Socialists, and they lived in Cairo with Gamal, what's his name?
Abdel Nasser.
Yeah, that's right. And they were basically instrumental in developing the propaganda program for Nasser's government and the whole Arab world against the Jews, which is very obviously valuable mission and purpose. But I'm sure that they're always involved in their cult activity. Like they're probably, that's like the secret history of the world. And the only people who can really know that are people who are initiates or who are involved in that sort of activity to any great extent, or whatever they want to reveal to people, or one of their enemies would expose, or whatever the case.
Miguel Serrano wrote, at this moment, I cannot predict the prospect for a Hitlerist resurgence. The only thing I can say is that I'm always surprised that in spite of the decades of brainwashing propaganda, young people are reborn again as National Socialists and admirers of Hitler, as if they were reincarnated in order to continue the struggle on this earth. This gives me hope and new energies to continue with the fight. Hitler and the swastika are enduring and eternal symbols, certainly archetypes with enduring powers of their own. The archetype will do the work by itself, even without our best knowledge and quite beyond our will and limited lifespan. This is our hope, our belief, and the only thing I know. There is no destiny for all of mankind, only for some. To recover their divinity, but not as the unconscious gods, but with full consciousness as a total man, in the sense of Jungian individuation, a God conscious of himself, which is only possible to achieve on this earth. To achieve this is the meaning of esoteric Hitlerism. When one arrives at such a state, one becomes the USO or the UFO or the Vimana itself, without need of an external new science or a new technology, because one has achieved a parallel world or a new place situation where we shall meet the Führer and the warriors of the last battalion. This will be the real space colonization as the ultimate expression of the Faustian soul. So this sounds like the formula to reach that level where Hyperboreans still exist, and where Don Miguel Serrano certainly was familiar with, and on that I don't know what level you'd call it, an astral level, where the legends of Hyperborea and all of this whole subject about Hitler being the ultimate avatar actually exists. And it sounds to me, in me with my limited understanding, trying to understand what this means, is that this is a figurative, almost literary device that doesn't really pertain to third dimensional reality. And yet, this is the hope that we have to cultivate if we're going to be the human beings that we hope to be, instead of the robotoids that the terrible tribe is trying to turn us into.
Well, John, isn't that analogous to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount? Give up all of your worldly goods and follow me. I mean, it's a similar routine. It seems like.
Yes, there is a similarity. Yes. What do you think, Loki?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. That's the fundamental orientation that people should have, is toward what's in their powers, or to cultivating their powers spiritually. But it may very well be true that all these claims about actual real UFOs are also true. I mean, it's clear that they had the Hanabu and so forth. But these things are sort of, at most they would give us hope. But sometimes, like Seneca said, it's better to cease to hope and to cease to fear. Just don't bother hoping at all. Just devote yourself to cultivating the higher spiritual aspects of your being, and then try to share this with other people and so forth, basically. Because what can you do? You're a limited being. You don't have the power to really tear down the whole evil of this world, but you can contribute to whatever extent you have the power to do so.
What kind of organizations or groups do you know of who might be interested in recruiting new members of people who wanted to find out more about this.
For Serrano,
Yeah,
I'm not really too familiar with any, except there's this one person named Jason Tompkins who's a translator of
Right.
Serrano's work. His website is ariosophy555.wordpress.com. And he is, I believe, affiliated with some type of order, but I'm not adequately familiar
yes, I
What
saw
that
one of his
is?
videos, yeah.
or how to get
Uh,
it.
Is there any connection between, because there's still, it's diminishing, but there is still a kind of working, it's not a group, but it's a series of people who are still on the case, of Holocaust revisionists who are plugged into this level of what you'd call spirituality in regard to promulgating the legend of Hitler and his original objectives. So what I'm trying to get at is there any correspondence between the two factions of people trying to promote free speech in Germany and people trying to better understand Hitler's ultimate purpose?
I'm
What do
not
you
too
think?
sure. It just seems to me like there's quite a severance between the two, more
Yeah.
exoteric and esoteric, that they each focus their energies on certain particular ways of operating or different angles or approach to oppose the corruption. But I'm not really too familiar with any of these groups.
Right.
I've actually
No, I
assisted-
haven't seen a bit. I've traveled in some circles to some degree, but I haven't seen anything like it. So I'm getting the feeling that this is kind of a dying art.
I would
That,
say the opposite. I would say it's just beginning a resurgence, or I'm not, maybe not even a resurgence, but a sort of a beginning, especially at this time, like in the case of World War II, with the Avatar coming. The Avatar basically signals or represents a spiritual force or spiritual being who focuses all of his energies to more or less control one particular representative figures of the nation who's sufficiently appropriate to serve as a vehicle of action on this plane. And this in World War II occurred in the case of Hitler, Mussolini, so many of these different figures, Jorge González von Marais in Chile, and throughout the entire world, Hirohito, in Thailand there was Phibon, there was,
Gandhi, yeah.
they're all over the place, and they're basically avatared by Vishnu. Basically, that is inevitable to reoccur because as a cyclical time, the yugas, things happen in cycles, and karmically, all the chaos and ruination and destruction caused by these dark forces, they're bringing about their own karmic backlash, and that will manifest almost undoubtedly in the form of some other representation of an archetype, Kalki avatar, which will then take hold of multiple figures, not necessarily only one, or maybe just as in that case of the World War II era, Hitler was a sort of front man or the pinnacle of that concentration of spiritual force. So everybody will, to varying degrees, depending on how purified they are spiritually and how developed they are, will be receptive to those forces. And that could very well be correlated with the black sun in the sense of its energies are amplified. Like when we get closer to the galactic center, maybe, then the forces of that will emanate more strongly, intensely upon this earth plane, and then people will be more and more affected by it. So you see, like in the case, to cite an anecdote of that, spiritual development. In 2015, when I was walking around in the countryside where I was living, all of a sudden there's this giant starburst that occurs over my head 4:30 in the morning when I'm walking around outside, and it illuminates the entire sky, and then I feel like I'm somehow, spiritually, some sort of energy is surging through me or something of that kind. Things like this, these cosmic processes, astrological alignments, emanations from the galactic center via maybe the sun, the black sun, the sun behind the sun, then that will help to amplify people's energies. So in other words, the point is to attune yourself to the sum total of being, not the demiurge, but beyond the demiurge, both being and non-being, not just the logos. Attune yourself, purify yourself spiritually, and elevate your vibrations, develop spiritual powers, and then you'll be more receptive to that archetype, and then you can represent it. You can act in a harmonious way to oppose this the demiurge and the forces of the demiurge.
Well, you've been a tremendous exponent of the subject, and it's like you're saying that if you continue to pursue this, you can become your own avatar.
Well, yeah, become your own God. That's the idea for the absolute personality, the integration of the sacred feminine for men, and then the woman basically, finding her, I guess, her absolute woman through, devotion and through basically affirmation of gender correlated with your anatomical, biological being. This is not some sort of twisted transgender, tranny stuff or androgyny. It's basically an integration of opposites into yourself, but, affirming your gender, sex correlation.
I have one more question, if you don't mind.
Please, yes.
How much emphasis would you put on a unified national exercise program such as Hitler had and various other countries have, and even the 5 times of prayer for the Muslims? How much unity is gained through that? Do you have any knowledge or experience there?
I think that's probably a good idea because it correlates your energies and activities with other people, so you're on the same wavelength or vibrational frequency. The National Socialist Pflicht zur Gesundheit, the obligation to be healthy, the whole emphasis was eugenics, was upgrading the stock spiritually and materially, and rekindling the blood memory through the various runes and archetypes that they utilized, symbols and sigils. And so that is basically very important. But of course, since we don't control the government or anything, how can you do that if not through just transmitting appropriate information through the internet to people, or people maybe try to start a local group, yoga or meditation group like Brian Rua has in Canada. He's got the Thula Contemplative Society of Adolf Hitler. So, if people coordinate certain meditations at certain times, then their energies are aligned together, and then they can be directed toward whatever purpose that they have as a collective group. So yeah, I think that's definitely highly significant to amplify that purpose. Like if you're a lone individual, it's not going to be as effective as if it were the more
unified,
quantitative.
Unified, and even individually, if practicing Tai Chi or something like that along that line helps strengthen your inner self.
Yeah, I would say so. Yoga and Tai Chi, I guess. The problem with a lot of those practices is that they're very tied in with Oriental distortion. So what is authentic for Aryans? I think yoga is probably slightly more so, because Tai Chi is a little bit more tied in with like the folk traditions of Chinese. So it's not necessarily as authentic for Aryans, but that type of exercise is good. Basically get the energy flowing through your body. Kundalini yoga and things like that.
Yeah, and you know, if you can't help yourself, you can't help anybody else.
That's it. It's a lot more positive than joining some sort of cloister and repeating all these insipid prayers of the demiurge,
Yeah.
like so many people do.
Right, yeah, and that's most of the mainstream religions I simply don't trust at all. I look upon them as sort of inauthentic and distortions. Although I do think that there are elements of truth in a couple of them, but I think that they are in and of themselves not really entirely adequate. But that's just my basic opinion. I am no expert, so I can't really speak as an authority on the subject at all.
My opinion is that they're just money holes, just a place to talk money. And well, I never did think that God needed my money. He was doing okay before I was born.
Well, Loki, I want to thank you for the presentation. It's been much more informative than I could have done myself, for sure. And I hope we generate some interest, and I hope you stay safe and don't run afoul of nasty people who don't like free thinkers, as we've all done in the past.
There are lots of those around in Canada, that's for sure.
Boy, you got it. It's a horrible situation up there, but it's a horrible situation everywhere. So thanks again. Thank you, Pat. Thank you to our caller. And I'm going to go back to Plumbing the Depths of Serrano, because I find his articulation of ancient history something you really can't find anywhere else, and it continues to interest me.
I would definitely say that Serrano is the way to go. There is nothing else available to understand the truth at this time.
That's right. Thanks again. Thank you, Pat. And we'll see you all next week. We hope.